Good morning. We're going to talk about interpersonal communication. We're going to find in this topic that there are some overlaps with the previous topic on some of the questions on persuasion, rather, in the last topic. So, what is effective communication? Where am I? There we go. Interpersonal communication, right? An interactional process. Got it. So, interpersonal communication involves at least two people, right? And one person sends a message, one person encodes the ideas and receives them. Clearly, in the act of interpersonal communication, the sender and the receiver are important, but so are the message, the channel, background noise, and the context in which this communication is being given, all of which can influence the effectiveness of that communication. So clearly, technology has created a whole new uh, channel of communication. It is very troublesome because a technology is missing much of the most important part, which I'll discuss right here, nonverbal. Very much of the communication is missing, and it's very interesting. Nonverbal communication is those aspects of the communication system which don't in fact involve words. Okay, so we're going to talk about emotions in particular. And it's kind of an interesting idea that human beings are quite creative and inventive. And recently, in these situations where interpersonal communication is limited, people have invented emojis, right? Emojis are a way to take that huge limitation in interpersonal communication that occurs in technology and eliminate it. All right. So nonverbal communication is really powerful. Emotions are powerful tools. So what happens is that nonverbal communication is transmitting information, and nonverbal communication is very, very difficult cross-culturally because it turns out that the way one culture uses this nonverbal communication is greatly different from another. And in fact, in America, if you want to convey sincerity or credibility or something like that, you make a lot of eye contact. But if you use a lot of eye contact in an Asian culture, you're going to be considered very, very aggressive. You're going to be not a person that people want to communicate with. Well, emotions are a powerful, powerful way. Because, I can say words and tell you information, but you can see an emotional state and you can feel what's inside of me. And so I like this image here. I've got four different smiles, okay? And we can see in these four different smiles four completely different emotional experiences. We can see the top left is like reluctant compliance, like or she's being I don't know. The bottom right is clearly a person that's being criticized. She's being told your performance sucks, and she says, "I understand," even though deep down she's thinking to herself, "You're full of shit." Meanwhile, look at that, the bottom left. Here is a guy that just told her that she sucks, right? And so here he is. He's got this smug little. I want to smack that smug face off of him. But you get it. It's four different smiles, and yet they're conveying such radically different pieces of information. And so there's other things that can be involved than just, of course, emotional, although I think emotions is probably the number one. But already the eye contact that we said, but also like personal space. How close do you get to somebody as part of this interaction? Other body language, this counts, right? This is good for something. But touch as well. Don't ask Joe Biden though, because he'll get you in trouble. So, what's really kind of cool is that this nonverbal communication stuff, which is so incredibly important, seems to in fact be it's true even in infants, even in these little children. You can see the same emotional expressions just by looking at their face, even though they don't have language in order to communicate with you. They are able to communicate an awful lot of information just with those facial expressions. So turns out that that nonverbal communication can be used to detect deception, and actually it's very interesting because in Asian contexts, people are taught to suppress their emotions. People don't show their emotional expressions. It's just That's how you communicate. Okay? Smiling is just an unacceptable thing to do out in public. And so what happens is that in America, when people want to understand emotional expressions, they're going to look at the face first, or at the mouth first, rather. Look at the muscles of the mouth, etc. And that's how we judge emotions. But in Asian context, what happens is if they want to judge emotional expressions, they don't look at the mouth because habitually people suppress smiles. However, emotions are much harder to hide. The emotional movements of the eyes are much harder to disguise than the emotional expressions of the mouth. Well, anyway, when it comes to detecting deception, what do you look for, right? And it's like people that don't make eye contact. Yeah, that's one of them. They're pretty subtle. So people have created a polygraph machines to to detect this stuff. So perhaps you've heard of polygraph machines or lie detector tests. And what a lie detector test is not a detection of lies, but it's like an anxiety detector, an emotion detector. Because the idea is most people, when they lie, do in fact feel some anxiety about it. And the machine will read the physiological arousal that is associated with the anxiety that is tied into lying. Okay? And so here is let's say, for example, you've got a company and some money was stolen and there was two people working and you want to find out who did it. Okay? So let's look at the person on the left. The person on the left is probably innocent and the person on the right is probably guilty. So let's take a look. So what they're going to do here is they're going to measure 1, 2, 3 lines here. These are different physiological responses. I think it's heart rate, uh, breathing, and galvanic skin response. I think is what it is. I can't remember for sure, but I believe so. And so what's going to happen is as we move across the bottom, you're going across time. So you're going to ask a question. What is your name? And then my name is John Smith. Okay. And you can see when the person responds, my name is John Smith, you can see a little spike there. You can see some effects. So now we know what your physiological state looks like when you're giving an answer that we know for a fact is true. Moving forward, did you steal the money? He says, no, I didn't steal the money. Okay? And you don't see any spikes at all in this person, right? There's no spike, there's no change in the arousal pattern in any of these physiological responses. Now go to the second person. First, a control question. What is your name? Oh, my name is John Doe. Okay. Take a look. That's what John Doe looks like when he is for sure telling the truth. Did you steal the money? No, I did not steal the money. And we can see some huge spikes in at least two of these physiological measures, which indicates to us when John Doe is telling us what we know to be the truth, looks like the left side of this image. When John Doe is telling the question that we do not in fact know about, look at the spike and the change in response. So it clearly seems to indicate that John Smith is telling the truth, whereas John Doe stole the money. Huh? Now, these lie detectors are kind of crappy because what you can do here is if you are in fact John Doe and you want to be not caught, what happens is when they ask the control question, what is your name? Do something like bite the inside of your cheek and create physiological arousal, because if you bite the inside of your cheek, it will make them spike at the control question and it will look like you have a spike every time you answer. So there's lots of ways to cheat the system. And again, the entire idea behind the polygraph was the assumption that it measures the physiological arousal that is associated with the anxiety that people feel when they lie. Well, if somebody is a quote sociopath, they don't feel anxiety when they lie, machine won't catch them. Well, it turns out that lie detectors are so faulty that they are no longer allowed in a court of law. They are not. Unfortunately, they are allowed in the court of public opinion. And so, boy, oh boy, if you ever get into a situation where you're challenged to take a lie detector test, you're out of luck. Okay, if you don't take it, then you're guilty because you didn't take it. And if you do take it, there's a very high likelihood that you'll fail it. Well, fail by their definition. All right, so more effective communication. Small talk. What do we know about small talk? Well, Introduce yourself, topics that others can relate to. I don't know. I'm not really a big fan of this stuff. I'll leave that up to you. I don't like this. Okay, more effective communication, self-disclosure. Although too much disclosure can be a bad thing too, but share about information about yourself with other people. It tends to lead to relationship development. Though females are far more likely to exhibit self-disclosure in most situations. However, it's more than just disclosing about yourself, but listening to others. Now, clearly this effective listening might just be copy and paste for what does it take to be a good therapist. Yeah, show interest in the person you're speaking with through nonverbal cues, right? Show that interest in what they're saying. Hear them, everything before you respond. Don't interrupt, okay? Active listening. And so that would be when somebody says something, active listening. This actually, active listening came out of the work of Carl Rogers, the therapist, the humanistic therapist. And with active listening, what happens is I hear what you're saying, all right? When people respond to you, you will rephrase. So it sounds like you're frustrated. You'll recommunicate what they said back to you to let them know that you have in fact heard what they said. Okay, so I'm not a biggie. Communication problems, communication apprehension, or kind of a social phobia of sorts. Um, Everybody has anxiety when they do public speaking. Some people feel anxiety just speaking to even an individual person. Um, but it's usually, group kind of a thing. And it happens to everybody. I'm sorry. I mean, you just get past it. You just kind of run it until it goes away. But we find that it can be a real problem for students because I'll tell you what, part of my job in psychology is to assess whether or not students have the skills necessary to succeed. And one of the most important skills that students in psychology students need, well, all, but what psychology students need to have in order to be effective in the world is communication skills. They just do. I mean, you need to be able to communicate in all mediums, right? You need to be able to speak, you need to be able to write, you need to be able to present, whatever it might be. And so we find that certain students, I had one student a couple of years ago, she avoided me. I don't know how she managed to graduate without ever taking a single course from me because she knew for a fact if she sat in my class that she would have to speak, that I will not allow that to happen. Every student, every class will participate, will add to the discussion, will talk. It is just part of the learning process. And she found a way to avoid every single one of my classes. So, anyway, how can you, how do you, what kind of responses do people have to communication avoidance? Withdrawal? Yeah, no. Okay. So, blah, blah, blah. Oh my God. Don't ever start a conversation with what you should have done is, I've been married for 20 some years. I promise you, you never start with that. All right. So, interpersonal conflict. This is actually a pretty interesting idea. When people disagree. And so we've seen this idea before when we talked about social dilemmas, and I have a couple more things on social dilemmas here, even though I already, they're pretty interesting to me. But interpersonal conflict, I like this idea. Down here on the right, it's a strange word that comes out of game theory in mathematics, really. But a non-zero sum game is a game in which well, how about this? I'll start with a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is a game where for every winner there must be a loser. If you play poker, if one guy wins $5, somebody else somewhere lost $5, right? The winners and the losers must balance out. And so what happens is in zero-sum games they are ultimately competitive, and I'm all for that. But what happens in many social situations is are what we call non-zero sum games. There are situations where you don't have to have winners and losers like this, where people simply work together, everybody wins or everybody loses. So, yeah, like I said, in poker, you got winners, you got losers. In non-zero sum games, you can have all winners and you can have all losers. Okay, so what we find is these non-zero sum games include here, for example, the tragedy of the commons, like we talked about. Okay, This is a non-zero sum situation, or yeah, non-zero sum. And if people simply work together, so how can we get them to work together? And the reason I'm putting it in here is because, well, we talked about regulation a little bit in some previous slide. I don't remember which one. I think it was in the self topic. Regulation, right? We're going to put in rules in place and say you can only have so many resources or something. But it turns out in places that are very small, people tend to follow the rules to begin with. But communication is the key. Communication. If you have people talk to each other, then non-zero sum games can be solved properly. So communication is very important. So now, how can we take this communication and get more effective? Okay, developing an assertive communication style. Now, an assertive communication style is definitely not the same as an aggressive communication style. Aggressive communication styles and submissive communication styles are pretty much an ineffective solution, right? You either give in to others or you demand that you get everything. No, assertiveness is almost the act of compromise, of course, right? That you're acting in your own best interest, you're expressing your thoughts and feelings, but of course you are also listening to others at the same time. So steps in assertiveness training. So you can mom blah blah blah. That doesn't. You enjoy that. All right, so that's really all I got to say on this topic. This is a relatively small one. As I said, it's strongly related to the persuasion chapter because communication is the key to persuasion. So we'll stop with that for today.